So the moment of truth is here. 2024 is gone and it's time to rank all 83 new releases I saw this year. If you're new to my channel, you don't watch my videos, you'll probably be surprised if you watch this. Some of my opinions, my rankings, a lot different than a lot of other YouTubers. I've already done reviews of all of these movies in depth, so I'm not going to do them in this video or it would take 10 hours. So I'll put a link to them up here at some point. You want to check out any in-depth thoughts. This is just an overview. These are my opinions, not yours. No reason to take them personally. And these are just the movies I got around to seeing. I didn't see a lot of movies. I don't have the time or money to see every single movie. So don't feel like something is snubbed. Just comment down below. Let me know what your list is. Let me know if you agree, disagree. But other than that, grab a beer, heat up some food, throw it on like a podcast. We're here for the long haul. This is my ranking for all 83 new movies that came out that I saw. Coming in at dead last, no surprise to anybody if you watch my worst of video, and quite frankly, the worst movie ever, Driveway Dolls. This movie's about these two girls who rent a driveway car. They go down to Florida and some criminals' luggage is in it. It's a Coen Brothers movie and not a whole lot to say about this. I didn't say in that video. This movie is painfully unfunny, awkward transitions throughout that were made in like Final Cut Pro, and there's no plot to this movie. You're just watching these girls going around trying to get laid by other women. And that's the whole point of the movie. There is no point to this movie. Terribly marketed. Pedro Pascal's in it. Matt Damon's in it for about 5 seconds, but they're in the trailer. So they lie about what this movie's about. It's not funny. I saw this in a theater with like 35 people. 3 people remained. I was one of them. I should have a championship belt for making it through this. This movie is dog shit. Do not waste your time and money with it. Driveway Dolls, worst movie I've ever seen. Comes in dead last. Will probably come in dead last for the next 10 years. Number 82 ahead of that is a movie called Alter Reality. Now this movie was one of the first movies I ever reviewed on this channel, and I probably wouldn't have sat through it or reviewed it if I wasn't new to YouTube and I wasn't experimenting. This movie has Tobin Bell in it, and I couldn't really even tell you what it's about. You have this guy, he's visited by this old guy who can time travel, and he offers him this pill that kind of cures all illnesses in one. So this guy gets rich off of it. He forms a company, and then you have this affair going on. It's kind of a Lifetime movie. Then his kid goes missing. It's kind of symbolic for him selling his soul for this drug and fame. It's just terrible. The main actor in this is the worst guy I've ever seen on the big screen. He cannot act at all. Couldn't even act in an adult film. I wonder how that guy's doing because there's no way he's still making money acting. It doesn't have a satisfying conclusion at all that wraps them all up. It is just a straight to Tubi movie that I somehow had the displeasure of watching in a movie theater. So at 81 is a movie called Carve that came straight to Hulu during Halloween. Not a whole lot to say about this one either. It's absolutely terrible. It's about a killer pumpkin, so you know what you're getting into with that. Problem I have is I threw this movie on very, very late one night expecting a kind of funny run-of-the-mill Halloween movie that deals with a killer pumpkin, and it just wasn't fun. It wasn't funny. It's trying to be like Superbad or something, but the comedy does not work at all. I didn't even chuckle during this movie. It's almost 2 hours long, and I'll leave it at that. It's a killer pumpkin movie. You'd expect big, dumb, stupid fun, but it's just stupid and there's no fun. So that's why it's this low. Pretty miserable watch, even though I went into it with absolutely no expectations. Next movie at number 80, a controversial one at the time, is Blink Twice. This movie stars Channing Tatum, and it's a story about this guy. He plays Slater King. He gets canceled. You know how it goes. He goes around on an apology tour. It doesn't tell you what he did, but you can deduce what he did. He abused somebody. He assaulted somebody. And the giveaway to that, they give you a trigger warning of it. They tell you exactly what he did because they tell you what themes they're going to be exploring in this film. A lot of people liked this film. They thought it was very stylistic. It was very suspenseful. I didn't get it at all because I thought this movie had no suspense, was boring as dirt. And as I said in my actual review of this movie, and I said in my ranking video, I do not understand how people found this movie suspenseful, profound. I don't know where the intrigue was. They told you exactly what the film was going to be, removing all mystery, all shock. So you're just watching a very, very boring movie play out where a guy goes around with a camera, keeps snapping pictures asking, are you having fun yet? And we are not having fun. We are not having any fun at all. An absolutely miserable watch in my opinion. This is a movie apparently you either love or you hate. My comments, absolutely divided war zone in this, but I do not back down. I think this is probably the second actual worst film of the year when it comes to movies released in theater that had any expectation attached to them. So if you don't want to succumb to watching this stuff, if this stuff triggers you, if you're a survivor of abuse, avoid this movie like the plague. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. There's no profound message at the end. It just is exactly what you think it would be. No mystery, no intrigue, boring, terrible. Next movie at number 79 is The Strangers Chapter 1. Now, this movie has no purpose to exist. It's a direct ripoff of the original Strangers, which is a movie I really like. just done way more poorly with no understanding of why that movie works. Apparently, this is the first of the 3-part movie series they're going to do about the strangers. Not sure we need any more backstory. That's not really why they're effective. They're effective because we don't know who they are. They just wear masks. They have no motive. But apparently, they need to introduce red herrings in this one and make you wonder who the strangers are. It's not small scale. It's scaled up. Doesn't take place in just a cottage. Take place in town as well. And this movie's fatal crime is it has the dumbest characters of the entire year. You have a guy with asthma hiding from a guy with an axe. He can't make any noise. So he grabs a water bottle, crinkles it up, and uses it for air, exposing himself. Then you have the main girl in this who's hiding in a closet after being home invaded. The boyfriend comes home, and he questions if she actually saw any of this. He asks her, "Have you been smoking weed again?" Most disgusting burger scene of all time. This movie is so bad, it single-handedly killed all intrigue I have for this entire trilogy. Maybe they can salvage it. I have no expectations for that. I think it's probably all going to be terrible. Next movie at number 78, and another controversial opinion, is Civil War. Now, as I said in my review for that one, I actually call this movie the Civil Snore, because I thought it was beyond boring. When I went into this movie, I expected them to do some form of commentary about the Civil War we could possibly have if things took a dark turn. Wondering how we got here as a country, why we're so divided, what brings us together, how we could resolve this. You don't get any of that. This movie is about war journalists, and quite frankly, this is the most spineless, ballless movie of the year that is afraid to say or offend anybody. I needed a lot more meat on the bones to enjoy this film. Looks okay, sounds okay, despicable, unlikable, stupid characters that go out of their way to get shot at every single scene, it seems. So this movie just doesn't have any purpose to exist, in my opinion. If you think war journalism is profound, maybe you love this movie. If you're like me, you want anything to do with the Civil War, this is not the movie for you. This movie just is afraid to say or offend anybody. And quite frankly, I take more offense in that than something I disagree with. Didn't have to say anything I agreed with, just had to say anything. Movie doesn't do it. Dog shit. Next movie coming in at number 77 is actually Night Swim, another one of Blumhouse's stinkers. I call this movie Night Swing because it's more of a baseball movie mixed with a haunted swimming pool than an actual horror movie. For some reason, half of this movie is about this guy's failed baseball career, so you have Field of Dreams mixed with a haunted swimming pool. Fantastic combination. I actually didn't review this movie on my channel, but it's a bold take to make a movie about a haunted swimming pool, and then they show this terrible CGI monster that's haunting the pool, and it's like a melting gingerbread man, terrible CGI. Not a whole lot to say about this one. If you've seen one Blumhouse movie, you've seen them all. This is just one of the latest stinkers where the whole movie's like 5 minutes of action shown in the trailer, stretched out across about 2 hours of boredom. So don't watch this movie. I think it's on Prime for free. If you do want to watch it, throw it on when you're doing absolutely anything else, or if you invite somebody over, maybe you can use it as bait to Netflix and chill because they will not want to watch this movie. Night Swim, terrible. At number 76, next movie is another Blumhouse masterpiece, that is Imaginary. This movie, beyond boring, it has absolutely no imagination and it's called Imaginary. That's its biggest crime. It's their take on Haunted Imaginary Friends, a PG-13 horror movie. So you're watching this family that moves into a new house that's apparently haunted. They have no chemistry. They're not believable at all. You have this stepmom who's dating this guy who's like a traveling musician who's kind of just in this movie for 3 minutes. You don't believe this family dynamic for a second. You don't believe these characters. You have every run-of-the-mill trope with this kid. He's seeing ghosts. He's drawing sinister pictures that the teacher's seeing. It's like the most written for AI movie ever made. Boring. There's nothing in this movie till the final 10 minutes. You go into the imagination world and you see this like demented teddy bear. You see what they could have done if they put an ounce of care into it. As I said in my review, Blumhouse needs to go. Their quality control is terrible. I cannot muster another PG-13 dud like this. At number 75 is the most recent B horror movie called Werewolves. Wanted to really like this one. This one was marketed as The Purge meets werewolves, but it's basically like if you went to Tubi and you turned on the old Jack Frost comedy horror movie, or you turned on the Ginger Dead Man. Stupid, stupid B horror movie, terrible production effect. It was just nothing what I wanted it to be. I wanted to really like this film, as I said, and you're watching Frank Grillo run around on basically the Purge night, and he's trying to get back to his family, except there's just nothing creative about these werewolves. They are done practically, which I can respect, but it's just a bunch of dudes in clunky, hunky suits, and they can't move around. So yeah, if you're not a fan of those really, really bad 70s, 80s, 90s, like purposely bad trauma movies, do not watch this film. It is not enjoyable whatsoever. One of the most miserable watches of the year. At number 74, and maybe surprising to some people because a lot of people have this as the worst, that is Madam Web. Now, why this movie is so low is obvious to anybody with eyes who ever watched it, but this entire Sony universe with no Spider-Man in it, Morbius, Craven, now this, all garbage. I mean, I am so glad this is dead because this movie is just a terribly made movie. That's the real insult behind it. The audio and the lips don't match up. And on top of the fact they clearly don't care, just obscure product placement right across the screen, Pepsi Cola sign on a bridge for 3 straight minutes. And it's just stupid shit like that where obviously this company does not care. They're putting no effort into these cash grabs. Thankfully, people are speaking up and they're not supporting it anymore. But yeah, you have Madam Web in this. She can like see the future or something, and you have the worst acted villain ever, Ezekiel Sims. He wants to be like an evil Spider-Man and he wants to kill these future superheroes. You don't even see them because they're not even aware they're superheroes yet. That's like 20 years down the road. Then she just cockblocks everything that happens because she sees the future. So he comes to kill these girls and then she runs him away like 5 minutes before he gets there. And the guy's just chasing his tail the whole time. There's no action in this movie. It's boring as dirt. So that's the real crime of this movie. It's just painfully boring. It's a terribly made movie. So that was the bottom 10. Now everything in this next chunk of movies all falls in the same line of terrible. They're kind of interchangeable. And coming in as the first entry into that is number 73, Time Cut. This movie was a Netflix exclusive. It was basically a ripoff of Totally Killer, but it came out years after. And it's just Back to the Future, but it's a slasher with none of the elements that made Totally Killer interesting. I mean, it's not funny. All the kills take place off screen. There's really no point to the plot of this. They don't explain it at all. Plot twist is predictable. In this movie, much like a lot of the movies below it, you're noticing a criteria for movies I don't enjoy much. Boring. There's no action. There's no kills. There's no likable characters. This is one of the most forgettable films of the year, and I feel like absolutely nobody's going to know this movie exists a year from now, and they're all going to think of Totally Killer when they think of this concept. Next movie on the list, coming in at number 72, is a movie that came straight to Shudder called Daddy's Head. I know what you're thinking. Daddy's Head. Fantastic name. Give the guy who named that a raise. It's just so good. But in all seriousness, this movie is just not good and it's very, very slow. It's like a metaphor and allegory for grief and losing somebody you love. This monster moves into this kid's house and he's wearing his dad's face. And that's what this movie's about. It's just this young kid seeing this monster that wears his dad's face around the house. And he has this absolutely miserable stepmom who is married to the dad before he passed. And the relationship between the mom and the kid and all yada, yada, yada. You've seen this movie 10,000 times if you've watched elevated horror movies. Just a huge swing and a miss. I heard a lot of people say this movie was really suspenseful, really scary. Not the case for me. I almost fell asleep watching this. I had to watch this movie 3 nights in a row to finish it. Next movie at number 71, kind of controversial because I heard fantastic things about this film. It's actually why I checked it out. That is Caddo Lake on HBO Max. I heard M. Night Shyamalan had involvement in this film, so I'm always going to keep my eyes open when I hear that, even though he doesn't always hit. And yeah, I just thought this movie was an absolute slog, absolute sleep remedy. It's kind of like a time travel movie of some sorts. It's like an unraveling mystery of like how these families connect from past to present. And apparently a lot of people like this movie because it all comes together and it just answers everything in a nice wrapped bow. But I didn't find any of it satisfying. I didn't find any of it interesting. I didn't find the twist to be enjoyable. I just thought this movie was painfully slow. Another movie, I had to stop and start this movie 2 or 3 nights in a row to get through the entire thing. So maybe this movie was for you. If you like those movies, you like time travel movies, you like movies that are absolute slow burn dramas, not a terribly made movie or anything. I just didn't enjoy this movie whatsoever. So next movie on the list, coming in at number 70 and probably the most overgassed horror movie of the year, in my opinion, that is In a Violent Nature. I constantly see things about this movie, how good it was. It's such a great year for horror. And then I see this movie's picture. Don't know what they watched. What it is, it's basically Friday the 13th from the killer's perspective. And we've done that in a couple of movies, like the old school Maniac movies and stuff like that. But this is like third person POV over the guy's shoulder. So you're watching him walk through the woods the entire movie. At least 60, 70 minutes out of 90 is just this guy walking through leaves rhythmically. It's like an ASMR simulator of watching this guy crunch leaves. And it's just him walking around, going on a hike in the woods. And there is one kill that's like an all-time kill, the yoga kill. It's very satisfying. It's a ridiculous kill, but it's not worth it. I described this movie as feeling like work. Felt like I was walking around on the job with this guy like, oh, gotta go kill some more today. Because it's just not enjoyable. There's no suspense to this. There's no music to this. This movie opened my eyes to the possibility of like, I thought this premise could be okay, but it's not good. I like the suspense of a horror movie, a slasher movie, like where the killer is. Since you know where the killer is and you're hanging out in the woods with him, it's just not enjoyable. There's no suspense to it. There's no mystery to it. You see the kills coming from a mile away. So when he's killing them, you're like, another day at the job, Johnny, you got to kill these people. I just didn't enjoy this movie. Next movie on the list, coming in at number 69, is M. Night Shyamalan's Daughters, The Watchers. Now, this movie is the ultimate litmus test. If you enjoyed this movie, good for you. There's nothing against you. As I said in the intro, you can like whatever you like. But no, if you like this movie, you have a very high tolerance for stupid bullshit. Because this was the first movie I ever ranted about. I ever did a spoiler rant. I didn't just review. I couldn't even review this movie. I didn't know how to. I could only vent about it. It is so stupid. It requires such a suspension of disbelief. It is painful at points. I mean, the way these characters act, somebody runs out and says, get into this box, quick. If you don't get in the box, you're going to die. This girl's lost in the woods and she just runs into the box. Like, she doesn't question who's inviting her, how she's lost in the woods. Nobody questions anything in this movie. And the trailer did a pretty good job of drawing intrigue in this one. You have these people trapped in a box. Every night they need to entertain these creatures called the Watchers. If they try to leave the forest, they try to leave the box, they will die. That's the point. But they don't answer any questions. How did anybody else get here? How did they eat? How do they shower? Who built the box? Why is there a silo below? Why is there a road that ends in the middle of these woods, but nobody else has ever found this? Wouldn't somebody eventually just find this road? So again, this movie is just insulting to your intelligence. How many liberties they took with the suspension of disbelief. I'm actually pretty lenient when it comes to watching stupid stuff if I think it can be fun. This movie takes the cake. It exceeds expectations. There is no movie that has asked me to think stupider than this movie. So this is just lazy script writing to a T, being forgiven because it moves the plot along. As I said, high tolerance. I could not overlook this one. That's why it's so bad. Next movie at number 68 is a movie called Hold Your Breath. Went straight to Hulu. This movie is basically elevated horror, and the point of the movie is it's a Dust Bowl movie all the way back in the West. And it's got Sarah Paulson, and she keeps seeing this guy called the Gray Man, I believe, and he keeps coming in. Allegory, metaphor, whatever you want to call it, for the struggle during the Dust Bowl. And if you're already falling asleep with that description, that's because it is. This is a painfully slow movie, kind of confusing at points. It's just about dust. About the Dust Bowl. There's no actual horror. There's just an allegory about this thing called the Gray Man that's coming for their kids. And don't watch this movie. This movie was so slow. It was one of the harder watches of the year. I mean, I didn't like it. Ahead of that at number 67, another entry into the Blumhouse stinkers. That is Afraid AI. Afraid whatever you want to call it. This is their movie about an evil AI who takes over the house. I have another theory. I believe this movie was written by AI about AI in some fifth dimension plot mega mind strategy to see if they could pass a plot from AI and they could sell it in future movies. Because this movie has, again, some of the dumbest characters of the year. Every character in this movie acts and talks like they were written by AI. It's almost like when you hear somebody who's a foreign speaker speak a language they don't speak, and they type it in the translator, and if you're familiar with the language, you go, that's not how you'd actually say that. That's not really how you'd say the dialect. That's how every character in this entire movie talks from start to finish. So it's incredibly painful to watch because you're watching this like evil Alexa take over this family's house. John Cho, I believe, is in this, and he just doesn't do anything. I like the guy, but I don't know why he was cast in this. Most random cameo of all time is David Desmalchian in this. I don't know how he got in this. Is this guy in debt or something? Somebody send this guy a GoFundMe. Objectively speaking, this is easily one of the worst films of the year. It just wasn't as painful to watch as the ones below it because I watched a lot of duds, so that's why it comes here. Ahead of that at number 66 is another movie that came out earlier in this year. One of the first movies I ever reviewed, that is called No Way Up. I believe this movie is on Hulu now. It's basically a shark movie, but it's about a plane that sinks to the bottom of the ocean, and you have that dilemma going as well. They're trapped in a capsized plane, and they have sharks so they can't get out. That's the point of the film. When I ranted about this film in my review, this movie just leaves itself no openings for fun. The moment these people dip their twinkie toes in the water, the sharks are coming, they're eating people. They're just watching these people like trapped in a corner of a plane and they can't even go in the water. There's some possibilities for fun for this one. This is almost in the hilariously bad category. That's actually how I categorized it. You have some awful dialogue in this one of people who are trying to escape. So I did laugh a good bit at this in the packed theater. The whole theater was laughing, unintentionally, I believe. So that's why this movie is where it is. If you're a fan of shark movies, if you're a fan of those like period chamber pieces where people are trapped in one location, maybe give this one a look. It's free on Hulu right now, but it's objectively not a good movie whatsoever, and I don't know anybody who's in it. Next movie at number 65 stars Halle Berry, and it's called Never Let Go. Elevated horror's most recent take at family dynamics and drama, where you have these kids who can only leave their house if they attach a rope to it. Otherwise, these evil entities outside in the woods will get them all. Problem with this film, much like a lot of the films, I feel like I've used this word 20 times already, boring. Because you're watching these kids and there's just no progression of this plot. You're watching them survive and it's very miserable and you obviously relate and you empathize with this. But you're watching these kids like eat tree bark for half the movie and they're just struggling. They're eating dog food and then they're debating putting their dog down. It's just a bunch of stuff you don't want to watch. And I don't really think the elevated horror of this movie pays off whatsoever. It's very predictable of where it's going to go. And you can kind of argue that it could be literal or metaphorical with the way this movie ends. But by the time you get there, you will probably be half asleep. You will not be intrigued by where this goes. Huge missed opportunity. I thought the premise of this movie was actually pretty engaging, the concept of needing the rope. But when they went full elevated with it and they removed all the scares, there's no suspense, there's no drama to this, It just bored me to tears, so that's why it is where it is. Ahead of that at number 64 is straight to HBO Max, Salem's Lot remake. This movie is a vampire movie, but apparently, as everybody says in my comments, it's just worse than the original in every way. I don't know, I've never seen the original. But yeah, this movie is very slow. It's about this guy who comes back to his hometown and the vampires attack. And I do like to return to scary, intimidating vampires. This movie attempts to do that. But everything other than that is an absolute slog. You don't care about any of these characters. Much like most of the movies on this list up until this point, you don't care about the plot. The plot has a bunch of conveniences just to move it along. That's why it comes in here straight to streaming garbage. That's why it was dumped straight to HBO. I'm assuming that's why it was pushed back 4 years. If you like vampire movies, maybe keep it in your repertoire. Maybe go check this out. But according to everybody in my comments, the original is just superior in every single way. So go check that one out instead. At number 63, the next movie stars Jon Snow, the short king of the north, playing a werewolf in The Beast Within. I believe this movie's for free on Hulu right now. So if you want to check it out, no cost to you, but I do not recommend it. I saw this at an AMC in an empty theater, and I almost fell asleep because this movie is not a werewolf movie. It is elevated horror to a T, which means, spoiler alert maybe, scroll 10 seconds, you don't want to see it, but I don't recommend you watch this anyways. He's not actually a werewolf. He is just an abusive drunk and angry dad. And the girl ends up seeing this guy as a werewolf so that she can cope from the stress, mental duress of growing up. And that's what this movie's about. So if that sounds interesting to you, you like those types of movies, maybe give it a whirl. But for me personally, I wanted to watch a werewolf movie. That's how it was marketed. And we got another 2024 dud elevated horror of a movie so far up its own ass, you will be snoozing by the end of it. Next movie on the list, coming in at number 62, is another PG-13 stinker called Tarot. Now, this movie is awful, don't get me wrong, objectively very bad movie, but if I walked into your house and you had this movie on, I wouldn't make fun of you for it. I would go, oh, you're watching Tarot? Like, that movie's not very good, and I'd move on. That's the difference between it and the movies below it. This movie's not painful to watch, it's just awful. This movie is just ridiculously stupid. They tell you the fate of every single character in the opening scene. You have these friends sitting around pulling tarot cards, and in a giant exposition dump, they pull cards of every single person. They go around the room and they say stuff like, oh, you've drawn the Hermit. It's time for you to let water under the bridge. Now, can you guess what water under the bridge means? Yeah, that person's probably going to drown. They do that for every single character in this movie. They tell you the exact movie within 5 minutes. And you also have the worst lead character ever in this. You have the guy who plays Spider-Man's friend in the Tom Holland movies. He's in here. I don't even remember his name. That's a credit to me. I hated him so much. He's the second worst actor of the year behind the guy in Alter Reality, the second worst movie on this list. So yeah, I think that guy showed up to an adult film set and they were just filming Tarot with the extras. And that's how he got the gig. There's no way he auditioned and he was given this role. I refuse to believe that. But the only saving grace to this movie in some regard is the creature design to the creatures on the tarot cards is actually okay. It's kind of cool in some parts. You don't really see them. They're not utilized well. But you could have fun with this. I could see teenagers having a decent enough time with this. I hated it, but I'm not a teenager anymore. And there's also one monster in particular, this like clown of this jester, this scene I actually thought was actually pretty well done for like a PG-13 movie. So that's it. If not for this scene, this movie would probably be scraping bottom 10. But it wasn't absolutely miserable to watch. I remember daydreaming about Taco Bell during a giant explanation scene, so I didn't have a terrible time with it. And with that, we've officially left the terrible category. Now, everything from this point on, I would consider okay, watchable, forgettable to some extent. Huge range here. So, you know, everything you hear now, some people might really like, some people might really hate. But for the most part, I had a decent enough time with all of these. I thought they were all watchable. But yeah, this is where it's going to really start to vary. There's going to be some things low on this list that people have really high, vice versa. So be on the lookout. And with that, we move on to number 61. That is going to be Damsel, a Netflix exclusive. This one starred Millie Bobby Brown. It's like a dragon movie where a girl gets thrown in a cage, has to survive a dragon, and it's just very forgettable. I couldn't tell you 90% of this film besides that. She gets thrown in this cave by the king or the prince or whatever, has to survive this dragon. It's like a ritual they do. CGI fest. Her in this crystal cave trying to survive this dragon. It's not painful by any means. It's just very slow and it's very forgettable. And it has some pretty cool CGI. You get to see a dragon, you get to see this crystal cave. I compared it to like the cave in Dark Souls for any of you gamers out there. So it's not the most unwatchable film I've ever seen. It's just a movie I don't remember a single detail about, so I had to put it here. But I don't remember despising it, if that says anything. Next movie on the list, and a lot of people really love this movie, but it didn't do anything for me. That is I Saw the TV Glow at number 60. Now, there's actually a friend of mine I've made on YouTube here who calls this movie I Saw the TV Blow. Can't help but laugh at that because I do kind of relate to his sentiment at this point. This is not a terrible movie by any means. It's a very well-made movie. I actually was really on board with this for the first 30 minutes. When you're meeting these characters, you got the writing on the screen, the aesthetic of it all, the style, the colors of the neon pink, the music choices. Really, really liked it. It was very nostalgic. The Pink Opaque, that show, meeting Mr. Melancholy. I thought it was really, really good in terms of setup. But the problem is it's called I Saw the TV Glow, and the metaphor was way too clear. This movie was exactly what you thought it was going to be within 20 minutes, and maybe that's to sell the point of your life passing you by. But my life was passing me by in the movie theater. I saw everything I needed to see within 20 minutes. And the next hour and a half or so was just an absolute bore to get through. Same thing over and over again about this kid's life. And it's not lost on me. If you're somebody who really relates to this movie, you're a disenfranchised youth, you had a terrible upbringing, you felt like an outcast, you fell into art like this. I just didn't relate to the central message of this, so I could sympathize with it, couldn't relate to it. And for that reason, I just thought it was a slog to get through. And I thought it was incredibly repetitive, incredibly over the top with how they hammered home this message. That's why it did nothing for me. But again, this is not a terrible movie. Honestly, this movie is well above average when it comes to some of the movies I've talked about so far. It just wasn't for me, and that's okay. Next movie at number 59 is one of the biggest disappointments of the year for me. That is A Quiet Place Day One. Now, a lot of people loved this film. They thought Joseph Quinn and Lupita Nyong'o were just great in this film. I loved the first two Quiet Places, but this movie was an absolute letdown in every way. It's a prequel where they don't explain anything to you. I wanted some answers. Where are these creatures? Where are they coming from? Yada, yada, yada. We don't get none of that. You're just going through with this terminally sick girl, played by Lupita Nyong'o. She's going for a slice of pizza. That's the emotional edge they're going for to get you to buy into her character. And I just didn't care about her character at all. I thought Joseph Quinn was a crybaby. I didn't think he could act at all in this movie. When people said he was like up for an Oscar, I was like, what are you smoking? At this point in the franchise, the monsters are no longer intimidating. They're just kind of funny and corny to look at. You have a cat that's thrown in here for emotional scenes or something, but that cat would never be quiet. Have you ever held a cat? That cat is not going face to face with these monsters without making a sound. Again, huge suspension of disbelief required for this film. I just didn't find this film to be interesting at all. You're just watching these two mope around and sob, being quiet the entire time. The little gimmick of them going has really gotten old at this point. It's almost insufferable to watch them do that. So I'm not really looking forward to this franchise anymore. I think I'm kind of mentally checked out with it. Love the first film, like the second film even more. This movie, colossal step down. Not unwatchable by any means, but it was just not it. Next movie, number 58, kind of in the same camp as A Quiet Place Day One. That is The Bike Riders. I know this was based on a real life biker club, but I left asking the question, is this club interesting enough we should write a book and talk about them? I do not think so. What you have going on in this movie is it's a star-studded cast. You have Tom Hardy, Austin Butler. These people are going around, they're bikers. You know, you're hanging out with these guys. I thought I was getting Goodfellas or something on bikes. That's not what you get at all. This is the most cookie cutter story that's narrated in the worst accent ever. And you're just watching these biker gangs. I tell everybody, if you want to watch the Bike Riders, just go down to your local biker bar or a bar where there's people with motorcycles and just hang out with the guys. Ask them about their doctor's visit. Ask them what beer they like. Ask them what job they worked. And that's the movie, because what these people do, what these people talk about, it's just not interesting. You're hanging out like you are a fly on the wall at a biker club, and they don't do anything. There's like no action in this movie. There's no like substance for how the rise and the fall of this club happens. You're just hanging out with a bunch of characters that are not interesting bikers at all. And it's like you're buddy with these guys. So I didn't have a good time with this movie at all. I thought this movie was probably the most forgettable movie of the year, to be honest. And if you're somebody who rides a motorcycle, or you're in a biker gang, or you go to these bars, you know these people, maybe it's very profound because it elicits some memory in your head and you really think of the good old days. I'm somebody who's never even sat on a motorcycle. That's how disconnected I was from this story. This movie did nothing for me. Next movie on the list, coming in at number 57, is A24's most recent horror comedy, Y2K. Now, this movie is its own take on a horror comedy involving if all of the aliens, all of the technology would have actually risen up and tried to kill us in Y2K, which sounds insane as a concept, but that's what a lot of people thought, hence that huge event. People thought the world was going to end. People thought robots were going to take us over, so it's not really that insane of a concept. What I really liked about this movie was the nostalgia of it all. It feels like early 2000s, late 90s. We don't get a lot of those genres. So watching this kid on AOL Instant Messenger and burning CDs brought back a lot of memories. It kind of works better as a coming-of-age tale, like a super bad type of comedy before they even go into the horror. Because about 30 minutes into this, the horror is introduced. These robots come to life. They kill off all of the interesting characters, all of the branches of this movie that could eventually lead somewhere funny. So you're left with this group of like outcast Breakfast Club kids walking around during the Y2K fight. And it's just not that interesting. These characters are boring characters that are not developed. You don't care about any of them. And you have this mopey lead character who's like in love with this girl. That's the angle they're going for. We have this like loser outcast kid who's in love with the popular girl, but she's not like every other girl. It's going for that thing. But he has no reason to really love her. He doesn't even know her. And he starts getting butthurt by the fact that she doesn't know that he loves her. It's just very low-hanging fruit rom-com, like coming of age stuff. So didn't connect with these characters. Didn't think the comedy hit. Killed all the characters at the wrong points, and there's really no action to this. So It felt like a very weird movie. Oh, and by the way, maybe spoiler alert, but it's been out. The entire third act is just Fred Durst and Limp Bizkit, and I didn't listen to Limp Bizkit, so. But I do own Chocolate Starfish. I don't listen to them, but I somehow own that CD. I'm not really sure how. Next movie at number 56 is a movie straight to Shudder, just came out last week, that is called Last Straw. Basically, I described this movie as The Strangers, taking place in a diner. We have this girl who works at her dad's diner. Her mom has just passed away. She just found out she's pregnant. And that's the movie. She's going to get home invaded at this diner, and you're going to try to survive the night with this character. Problem is, this character is probably the single most unlikable main character of the year. Her character, irredeemable, has no redemption arc. She is just a snobby bitch to everybody throughout the movie. So you have a home invasion movie where you're supposed to root for this character to make it through the night, but you do not like her character. You kind of want her dead. And that's what you got going on with this movie. But what this movie really does criminally is it starts off intriguing enough. The first 20, 30 minutes when you meet her at the diner and you see these people come wearing masks, I was on board with it as a horror movie. I like home invasion movies. Then about halfway through the movie, it does that thing movies do, where it just goes through the first half of the movie again from a different perspective once something happens. Major twist, major scene comes in where you find out a reveal. Then it starts over from the first part of the movie and it just goes through it from another person's perspective. Problem is, I don't think it was interesting enough and these characters aren't likable enough to do it again. So you're left watching the same movie a second time. Some people might like this film. They might find it interesting how it goes from like a home invasion movie to an old school crime thriller. But for me, they killed all the tension, all of the mystery. And I was just hanging out watching a kind of monotonous, repetitive story with unlikable characters for a second time. By no means unwatchable, just huge letdown based on a solid start. Next movie on the list, another kind of forgettable movie, is Killer's Game, number 55, the Dave Bautista action film. Not going to say a whole lot about this one. This is the most run-of-the-mill copy in that new John Wick style of action movies that are over the top. Very stylized. You have people like running onto the screen with comic tags on them. You have this character, Dave Bautista. He finds out he's dying. He has like a terminal illness. So he puts out a hit on himself from this League of Assassins. Finds out from his doctor he had the wrong test, and he's not going to die. So he calls off the hit, but it's too late. So now he's fighting all of the world's best assassins. That's the movie. Now I will say this, if you're a fan of these type of films where you have this comic book type style to these movies, you might really have a good time with this one. For me, another kind of forgettable action film amongst the rest of them this year. So for me, Killer's Game is just one of the more repetitive action movies in this modern trend. We're getting a very stylized, over the top, 1 versus 100 action movies. So it's not very memorable to me, but I could understand how somebody likes it. Next movie on the list, coming in at number 54, is actually a straight to Netflix movie that got a lot of buzz called It's What's Inside. Now the premise of this movie, basically you have these kids playing a party game. What you do is you go to a party, everybody hooks up to this machine this guy brings, and you can swap bodies with each other. So it's a body swap horror comedy, and people play games. They make out with one another. They try to guess who's who based on their actions. By the end of the night, people will be dying. People will be hooking up with people they're not supposed to. And there's just huge problems that arise from playing this party game because the guy who shows up is not who he says. The problem with this movie is this movie has some of the most unlikable characters of the year. You do not like any of them. They are all perpetually, permanently online. All they do is share TikToks, Instagrams, tag people, share memes. It's one of those movies in the trend of movies that is incredibly fast-paced with the way they edit. Split screen, Snapchat, tagging, Instagram. It's just very stylized to be very modern in form of technology. Very overwhelming at a certain point. It just gets annoying. The movie moves so fast. They're kind of all unlikable, so you want them all dead by the end of the film. And by the time the big reveal comes, you kind of don't care because you don't care about what happens to any of these characters. Why it's this high on the list? I did find it to be kind of fun, at least for the first half of the film. When you're going through the gimmick of the party game, trying to figure out where it's going, I was intrigued. I thought it was a very interesting setup. The style, as I said, was kind of interesting at the beginning, and then it just became brain rot by the end. There's some good stuff here. I enjoyed parts of this film, but I would never even fathom rewatching this film. That's why it comes in here. Coming in at number 53 is another movie that had a limited release very early this year. That is called Humane. This is kind of like a horror movie's take on COVID to some extent. Basically what you have happening, you have the government issuing this program where they pay a family to euthanize a member. So this guy shows up at the house and he basically kills a family member of yours and they give you a large sum of money. That's the way the government controls in this movie. This dad wants to die to get his family taken care of, and he realizes when the guy shows up, he doesn't actually want to die, but the guy who works for the company is kind of like, yeah, dude, you're boned. Like, I work for the government. You are going to die by the end of the night. So somebody in this family is dying. I'm not leaving without a body. And that's the point of the movie. It's a horror comedy. It just doesn't take itself seriously whatsoever. The guy who's showing up taking these bodies, he is just an absolute cartoon. Obviously, as I said, it's a mock, it's a comedy, it's a satire. But for me, I would have liked if they explored this premise a little bit more seriously. This movie just doesn't take itself seriously enough for me. So that's why it comes in here. There's not really any laughs in here either, given the fact that it's a comedy. So If it sounds interesting by the way I'm describing it to you, maybe check it out. It is on Shudder right now, but I wouldn't rush out to see this or anything. This is just a very, very forgettable kind of like government pandemic type of horror movie. Next movie on the list, coming in at number 52, a movie I don't really understand the direct hate for, that is Borderlands. By no means a fantastic movie, but I've seen a lot worse, especially when it comes to these video game adaptations. The games aren't good. We need to say that. People act like this is a travesty to the Borderlands franchise. Those games are terrible. They have cringe humor. They feel like they're written by 50-year-olds for teenagers. So going into this, I don't really know what people were expecting. It's kind of exactly what I would expect from the game. I think people really hated the hiring. They're really sick of Kevin Hart, but I didn't think he was that bad in this movie. He's very toned down. He's not doing his Kevin Hart-isms with the loud voice. Not a whole lot to say about this one. I was in the minority of people who didn't have an absolutely awful time with this one. I thought it was just an okay action comedy. Seen a lot worse this year, seen a lot worse in the past years. So I don't know. If you like the Borderlands games, you like video game adaptations, maybe give it a look. If anybody has a reason for why this movie's so bad, comment down below. I genuinely don't know. It's just okay. Next movie on the list, coming in at number 51, is a movie called Azrael. It's on Shudder, stars Samara Weaving. This is kind of a post-apocalyptic world after the rapture. All the people that were bad are left on Earth, and they can no longer talk as punishment. That's really the problem with this film. Nobody can talk, so you can't connect to these characters. You can't move the plot along. You can't understand the lore. So you're kind of left in the dark wondering like what the point of this movie is, who these people are. You know they're all bad. You know they're all irredeemable. So why am I supposed to connect to these characters? But it has some redeeming qualities. I think the horror at points is kind of interesting. You have these like zombie creatures, some interesting gore, and it's just okay. If you like Shudder movies, it sounds kind of interesting. You like post-apocalyptic religious type films, maybe check this one out. But as I said, be skeptical because there's no dialogue to it. So I thought it was kind of hard to follow, like what the purpose of this was, who was good, who was bad. By no means an unwatchable film. It's only like 80 to 90 minutes, so it's a brief watch. That's why it's this high. But a movie I'm never going to watch, and it's pretty forgettable. Next movie, coming in at number 50, is a movie called Arcadian, starring Nicolas Cage, another Shudder movie. And this movie was in theaters for a limited time. It's basically A Quiet Place meets Nicolas Cage, where he has these two kids and they're trying to survive in a post-apocalyptic world, and they just live isolated on a farm. And it starts off, Nicolas Cage is in it. I was really digging it for the first 20 or 30 minutes. You meet in this family, he's giving his sons lessons, and these creatures come, and it's like you can't open the door. It's basically, it comes at night, but you actually get to see something in this one. So I was on board. I'm like, what's going on with these creatures? Like, what's going on in this world? I love post-apocalyptic movies. Then Nicolas Cage kind of just falls off the earth after 30 minutes. He's not even in the movie, and you're hanging out with these two kids who are trying to survive, and you don't really know anything about them, and you kind of lost all the star power, and you see a really cool scene of these creatures. And I was like, okay, I'm back on board. That creature looks really cool. And then the scene after that, you get to see this creature whose mouth is flapping a mile a minute, and it looks like that stupid wind-up toy with the teeth. And I instantly checked out, and I was like, okay, now we're doing it again. Like, we're done. And that was the problem with this movie. It shows the monsters way too much. It's obviously budget restricted, incredibly dark. You cannot see a lot of it because they're doing that thing where they cover up what they can't show. And you get flashbanged 5 times during this movie where it goes from absolute pitch black to super bright lights because they need to expose you to what's going on. This movie kind of hurt my eyes by the end of it, and I thought the monsters looked ridiculously stupid, but it started off okay. If it sounds interesting enough to you, you like A Quiet Place, maybe give this one a look. It is on Shudder right now. I think it's on VOD as well. Not the worst movie I've ever seen, but it just left something to be desired based on the start. Next movie on the list at number 49 has my favorite actor in it, Casey Affleck, called Slingshot. And I say that because in my review, I said Casey Affleck, I have never seen a good movie with that guy in it. So if you have seen one, comment down below, let me know, prove me wrong. But in all seriousness, you have Casey Affleck in this, you have Lawrence Fishburne. One day they're on a space station and something like hits the ship, or they think something's on board. They all start getting very paranoid with what's going on. Can they make the journey? They're going to Slingshot to travel to a galaxy nobody has ever made it to before. And that's what this movie is about. It's like this sci-fi thriller of paranoia in space where nothing is as it seems. That's how they would market it. Problem is, this movie is kind of weird. It's 2 movies. It's them on the space station. Every 10 minutes, you get a 10-minute flashback. So it's alternating 2 movies entirely. I didn't find the flashbacks to be particularly interesting or add anything to this film. And it starts off intriguing enough for the first 10, 20 minutes. I actually really liked it, but it just kind of goes nowhere. It just fizzles out by the end of it. The explanations you get are ultimately predictable, and the record remains true. Casey Affleck can never act in a movie that's above mid. It's just his legacy at this point, to star in these movies that are gassed up, but ultimately underachieve. Next movie on the list, coming in at number 48, is a movie called Crumb Catcher. Not sure if this movie came out last year, but it came out in theaters this year, so I'm going to talk about it. Very, very strange movie, but also very interesting off the bat. You have these guys, they meet at a wedding, And then you have the groom and the bride. They go away on their honeymoon to this cottage. They're spending the night. They're relaxing for a getaway. And the guy from the wedding he met shows up, this creepy, weird old guy. He's kind of comedic though. And he introduces to them a product he's been trying to invent his whole life. He says it will change the world. It's called the crumb catcher. So that's what you have going on in this one. You have a couple trying to spend their honeymoon in this cottage, and this creepy old guy shows up trying to pitch them an investment. Formal slides, everything. He's going all out. He's trying to get their money for the crumb catcher. So, and the point of it obviously is it's like this weird thing of bread that sweeps up crumbs. That's what he's trying to sell them. This movie's like 50 different movies in one. It's kind of like a horror movie, thriller, crime movie, and then it's kind of a comedy. It's everything. So if you like hodgepodge movies, maybe check this one out. My problem with this film, like a lot of them, it fizzles out. I thought it started intriguing enough. You're really wondering like who this guy is, like why he's pitching this product. By the end of it though, I thought it just ran itself out of gas. I thought it tried to be too many things. Ultimately predictable once again. You kind of figure out what's going to happen about halfway through. And from that point, it changes genres into a movie that ultimately was just pretty forgettable to me, but it's definitely not an unwatchable movie. The two people I saw this in a theater with, they were actually talking on the way out. They were asking, they're like, did you like that movie? The other two people I was with really liked this film. So if you never heard of it, sounds intriguing enough, sounds weird. You like really weird movies, maybe check out Crumb Catcher, but for me, not one I'd revisit personally. Coming in at number 47 below that is actually Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. And a lot of people are probably going to have this movie very, very high at the end of the year, and I understand why if it's your thing. I'm not fanatical about Mad Max. I did love Fury Road, thought it was a fantastic movie, but this movie, in my opinion, just didn't need to exist. We knew what happened with Furiosa and Fury Road, so this movie had no stakes to it. Every scene she's in an action scene, we know she's going to live because it's a prequel. Some people probably really liked it regardless of all of that. They overlooked it and just thought it was a fun little action movie. I thought Chris Hemsworth was really good in this, besides his stupid little fake nose prosthetic, but I just didn't really find any of the action scenes in the CGI particularly good or entertaining. I was pretty bored in this movie. I checked my watch a number of times. It's over 2 hours. I would never rewatch this movie. The way I thought about it is I would just rewatch Fury Road. Fury Road is just better in every capacity than this movie. So maybe that's unfair to just directly compare them like that, but that's the mental approach I was coming at this from. Just ultimately a forgettable movie for me, and I think Anya Taylor-Joy did what she can as Furiosa, but I thought Charlize Theron was a better version of it. That's all this movie is to me. It's just an inferior version of Fury Road, a prequel with a story we didn't need to hear, and it didn't really explain anything or add any layers to this world that now that I've seen it added anything to my experience with the other movies. It's just kind of there. Next movie on the list at number 46 is another straight to Hulu Halloween movie called Mr. Crockett. Basically an evil version of Mr. Rogers. You know those shows you throw on after school where it's like the dad that's not your dad, where you watched him learn life lessons? Yeah, he's in this movie, except if you're watching his program, the parents are bad in the background, he will come through the TV and brutally kill you. But what I actually liked about this movie a little bit is it is absolutely demented. From the opening scene, it is like hostile level gore. I went into this, thought it was going to be like a PG-13 horror movie. You get some absurd gore and some absurd kills in this movie, so I was on board Mr. Crockett. He's also just a rootable character. He comes through the screen and he punishes terrible parents. Who doesn't get on board with that? So you're watching Mr. Crockett, he's giving these kids lessons, he's killing bad parents. What's not to like? Problem with the film ultimately is it doesn't lean heavily enough into the horror. That's why it's a straight to streaming movie. That being said though, I would actually like to see a sequel to this movie, maybe like an anthology. We get to see more of his tales because the world he has is actually pretty cool. When you go into his world, adults see these things as like nightmares. Kids see them as cartoons. I thought there were some cool stylistic choices, some commentary about kids going missing, not having fathers, especially from certain demographics and ages. It was one of the better streaming movies I saw this year. By no means a fantastic movie or anything, but definitely very watchable. Especially if you want a little bit of a step up from like a Goosebumps Creepshow type of movie. Rated R with some solid message behind it, to be honest. Next movie at number 45 is called The Man in the White Van. Bet you won't predict what this movie's about. That's right. You have a guy in a white van driving around abducting and killing women. Throwback to the 70s. That's what this is. It's like period horror. And I have to be transparent. I was enjoying this movie for a good bit, at least the first 2/3 of it. And then somebody in my theater decided to be a dickhead, got thrown out because they threw a pop and popcorn on people. They were clicking their chair. Well, I really couldn't even tell you what the final third of this movie was because I was dealing with security. So that's what I'm going to say about this movie. If you like 70s throwback movies and you have a really good time learning about serial killers and you like those abduction movies, you like Lifetime films. But the problem is also what I just said. It does ultimately feel kind of like a Lifetime film. It feels very familiar. You don't really find this guy's motive. You don't get the closure you want. Acting is pretty decent, I will say. I mean, you recognize everybody in this movie, but you don't really know their names. That's the type of cast you have. You could definitely do worse if you like this type of movie. Check it out maybe when it comes to VOD. It's called The Man in the White Van. For me though, I would never revisit this movie. It was just a swift one-time watch. I was having a good enough time until that idiot ruined the movie. Next movie at number 44, kind of controversially, is First Omen. Now, this was a movie in my comment sections when I reviewed it. Everybody was in an uproar. I said it was boring. They were just not having it. They said I did not know horror movies. They hated that I hated that movie. And looking back, I don't actually hate the movie. I just thought it was very, very slow. I'm not a super fan of religious horror movies. And this movie did nothing to dispel how I normally feel. It's like the most run-of-the-mill, generically well-done religious horror movie I've ever seen. Also doesn't help the fact that Immaculate came out the same year, and it is a scene-for-scene remake of that movie. I will say, though, that the main girl of The First Omen is absolutely fantastic. She has like a 2 or 3 minute scene where she's becoming possessed, that scene we're all infamous with, where she just kills it. It's like one of the best performances of the year. I think the plot makes sense in retrospect. It just didn't do anything for me. This is a movie I feel like didn't need to exist. Doesn't really add anything to the Omen universe. They can only take so many liberties. They did some weird stuff at the end. For me, stylistically, it just didn't work. It was very, very slow. The orange overtint was kind of ugly. And it just was kind of gross for the sake of being gross at certain points. It didn't really feel like a very scary horror movie. It was never tense. It just felt like the other 40 religious horror movies I never really bought into. So I know this movie works for a ton of people. They absolutely love it. For me, though, just not my thing. Next movie on the list, very fittingly at number 43, is Immaculate, starring Sydney Sweeney. As I said, basically a carbon copy scene for scene of First Omen. They're the same type of movie. This movie also did nothing to dispel what I don't like about religious horror films, but I will say this movie was saved by its final 15 to 20 minutes. If not for that, probably would have been in dumpster tier for me, honestly. But I did like this movie more than First Omen. I thought it was more interesting. I thought it was more unique. First Omen, objectively, probably a better movie. It's better made and it probably has a better lead. But this movie, at least, I thought the first half of the movie tried to take chances a lot of religious horror movies didn't make. You have this thing going on where this girl goes away to be a nun and she goes to this monastery or whatever you want to call it. Basically the setup for every single religious horror movie. And she finds out some weird stuff that's going on that applies to her because she becomes pregnant suddenly. And it's just an interesting take on it, I will say. Again, not fantastic by any means, but at least they tried to take some chances in a genre I am fundamentally burnt out from. So if these movies are your type of thing, you probably liked both of those movies. If they're not your thing like me, probably didn't like either. Next movie, coming in at number 42, and quite frankly, a movie I did not think was going to be this high until I compiled a list, that is Stop Motion. Now, I believe this is a Shudder exclusive, but it did come to a theater because that's where I saw it. This movie starts off really, really good. I said in my review for this, again, one of my first reviews, so it's very raw, but this movie started off fantastic. If this movie could have wrapped it up well and it could have sealed the deal, this movie would have been an all-timer for me. I think like the first 20, 30, 40 minutes of this, absolutely fantastic. I loved it. I thought it was suspenseful, tense, dreary. I was on board with this. You have this girl who's like a stop motion director and she's making this very, very creepy stop motion picture. And then this girl shows up at her apartment and kind of undermines everything she's doing and says, that's not how you should make the stop motion picture. Follow me. When you're in the stop motion realm, I really like stop motion to begin with. It's very, very creepy. It's very unique. I don't know if I've ever seen another movie like that. In the first half of it, I thought it was awesome. But then about halfway through this movie, it really changes up. It does what a lot of horror movies do. I'm not going to give away where it goes exactly, but it goes kind of elevated horror and it kind of gets in itself and it just starts taking too many chances. It doesn't stick in the simplicity. So it really loses what makes the movie fun fundamentally and what makes it so scary and so creepy. So the second half of this movie, in my opinion, was way, way worse than the first half. If it would have wrapped up that first half, this movie might have been top 5, in my opinion. I like the first half of it that much. I do have to rewatch it, though, and see if the second half holds up better a second time. But I also put it this high because while it's not fundamentally an incredibly scary movie, as I said, this movie has probably the most overlooked gnarly body horror of the year. There's one scene in particular in this movie where a girl like cuts open her leg and she starts pulling it apart, and it is probably the hardest to watch body horror of the year. So if this movie sounds intriguing to you, if you want a really, really, really disgusting conclusion with body horror, maybe check this one out because this is one I'm still wincing and threatening to look away from. I had to really fight to look at this. Let's just say that. The next movie, number 41, most recent Russell Crowe exorcism movie, is actually called The Exorcism. A lot of people hated this movie. I thought it was painless. I don't know why I didn't mind this movie. Fundamentally, I should hate this movie for every reason I said. But it's about Russell Crowe. He's like a washed-up actor. He's playing a priest in the newest Exorcist movie. A movie within a movie. It's doing that shtick. It's very elevated horror. Things start unraveling within his career with him taking this job and him being an alcoholic, yada, yada, yada. You've seen this 100 times. I even said in my review, I basically trashed this movie until the rating. Somehow, I didn't mind it. I couldn't even give you a reason why. But yeah, everybody hates this film. I don't think it's nearly as like unwatchable as people say. It's just very run-of-the-mill exorcism type movie we've seen 10,000 times. It just is all focused on him instead of an actual exorcism. It's like a character study. But it's harmless. It's just not very good. But it's not the worst. Next movie, number 40, is another straight-to-Netflix movie called Don't Move. Sam Raimi's name was attached to this one, which caught my interest. And basically what it's about, you have this girl who goes out in the park one day. She runs into this guy who speaks her off the ledge and says that she has stuff to live for, yada, yada, yada. But what she doesn't know is this guy is doing that because he wants to kill her. He's a serial killer. What he does is he drugs her. Her body goes paralyzed, and for the second half of the movie, she basically can't move. She's just like a limp corpse trying to like survive this guy in a lot of different goofy ways. As for the setup of this film, I did find it interesting enough, but where this movie actually excelled, in my opinion, is it was actually very suspenseful to watch this person unable to move. So it kind of worked for me, watching this body being hit away and having bugs crawl over it and just thinking about what it would be like to not be able to move, flow down the river, and you're afraid you would drown or fall off a waterfall because, again, you're just a corpse floating. There's a lot of goofy stuff like this in this movie, but I also thought it was pretty suspenseful, as I just said. So it didn't fully work for me. It's kind of like straight to Netflix to the T, if you know what I mean, but it had decent moments, so it wasn't nearly one of the worst watches of the year. I'd recommend it if it sounds good. At number 39 is actually not a movie, but a found footage movie made on YouTube by a YouTuber called Milk and Cereal. Basically, you have this guy named Milk, and it's just a found footage movie where pranks keep progressively getting worse and worse. And then something happens, it alters what this movie is going to be about, and it takes a drastic turn. It's like a horror movie thriller, but it's just really, really well done. I found out this movie was made for like $800. It was kind of the talk of the town on the internet for about a week. Everyone was linking this movie, saying it was such a good found footage movie. I have to say, as somebody who's not actually fanatical about found footage movie, it is very, very good for a found footage movie. So if you want to look it up on YouTube right now. Look up Milk and Cereal. It's by this guy. He does comedy skits, but apparently in this one, he does horror shorts as well. I'll be on the lookout for him. I thought this movie was very, very good, especially for $800. As somebody who wants to make their own short someday, dabbles around with editing, things like that, this movie is an inspiration. I think it is well above average. Give it a look. Coming in at number 38 is A24's Love Lies Bleeding. It's like this girl who works at a gym who's a burnout, whose dad's a mafia boss or a crime boss, falls in love with this girl who's becoming a bodybuilder, and it's a very, very strange A24 crime thriller, but it is interesting. I don't 100% remember how this movie gets to where it goes, but somehow these two end up killing somebody, or they get in with this crime boss. The dad doesn't know that it was these two who did it, and they try to go on the run. And just very, very weird stylistic choices start happening where people are morphing to show roid rage. They're becoming like the Hulk. The final scene of this movie is one of the strangest scenes of the year. If it wasn't in this movie would probably be more memorable, and I probably would have it ranked 20 spots higher. That's all I'm going to say is me shaking my head. I mean, you're going to look at it and go like, what are we doing, A24? But a lot of people do really love this movie when I see other lists. This movie is very well acted. It's very stylistic. It feels very 80s. And this is by the director, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about the movie. I believe this director made like Saint Maud. Strange directing choices, but at the end of the day, it is a very interesting movie. I recommend it. At 37 is a sequel I'm still not sure we needed. That is Gladiator 2. Now, when I saw the teaser trailer months ago, thought it looked okay until I saw the one with the official music, and I thought it looked really bad. I didn't think it fit at all. But Denzel Washington was in it. I was always going to be there. My favorite actor. Think the guy's phenomenal. This just didn't feel like a Gladiator movie to me. It felt like a big, dumb action fun movie, and that's not what I want out of my Gladiators. It was sorely missing the charisma of Joaquin Phoenix, Russell Crowe, the guy they cast, Paul Mescal, I believe. He's okay at points, but super frustrating. Like, the guy has no oomph, no charisma. Every once in a while, he would give a speech, and I'd be like, there we go, Paul. That's what we're missing. And it would just go away. It was like he was collecting a paycheck. The guy didn't care. Like, feels like a lot of people phoned it in. Like, this was kind of a cash grab. By no means the worst movie, but it kind of felt like something you'd find in the Walmart bargain bin, free on Amazon Prime. Like, a hidden sequel you were unaware of. An adult parody, may I say, the way people acted. I was not really sure why this needed to be made. It really didn't add anything to the original, and they said they're making a 3, which I'm kind of not looking forward to, and I feel like they should just stop while they're ahead. So by no means the worst movie, just a very, very forgettable sequel that quite frankly didn't need to be made, following up an absolutely fantastic classic. Number 36 is by Guy Ritchie, and it's called The Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. This is kind of like a thriller comedy or something. Guy Ritchie style, as always, has Henry Cavill, Alan Richardson, and apparently this tells the true story of this crew during the war who did these like anonymous jobs for the British government, and just people never knew who they were, so that was the point of this film. And this is the part of the list that gets really interesting and really tricky, because I gave this movie a buy rating when I saw it earlier this year. Rewatched it on Prime with a friend, and I was not really that into it the second time. A lot of people had gripes with this film, thought the pacing was off. Really felt it the second time, so I thought it was pretty funny the first time. The jokes were not the same the second time. But you're watching this crew, they're doing this like undercover mission where they're doing something during the war, and it has its moments, but the problem is there's just no opposition to these guys. So you really don't get that Guy Ritchie style that you come to know when it comes to these like spy espionage thrillers. It just feels like a giant live action cartoon, so this is a strange one. I'm glad I did this end of the year review, because if I did this during the beginning of the year, this one would be very, very high up. But yeah, this one fell a lot of pegs when I watched it the second time. Next movie at number 35 is Deadpool and Wolverine. I'm just going to be transparent with you guys. I'm not a super Marvel fanboy. I stopped watching those movies after Endgame, and I didn't even see half the movies before Endgame. I've never seen a Thor movie. I've never seen a Captain America movie. When this movie was playing, it was all these references and callbacks and cameos. I didn't understand half of them, but I still had a pretty good time laughing at this movie. People were like clapping and crying at this movie. It was just like something that touched their soul. I didn't have that experience, wish I could have, but I'm just not that invested. So this movie was funny at points, but it had absolutely no plot. It was just an on-running gag reel of jokes at the MCU, a bunch of cameos, a bunch of flashbacks and callbacks that I didn't understand a lot of. So it was an entertaining enough time. I probably will never rewatch this movie as well. That's why it's not high enough for me. I'm just not invested in the MCU, really. I kind of got burned out of those movies a decade ago. If you like this movie, more power to you. I'm glad it really hit for you. Next movie on the list, number 34, is Longlegs. Now, this is one of the most confusing and kind of disappointing movies of the year for me. One of my most anticipated. I've talked ad nauseum about this film. I can only say so much about Micah Monroe playing this detective who's hunting down Nicolas Cage, this serial killer named Longlegs. Kind of a ripoff of Silence of the Lambs, but it goes a different route. And I have to say, this movie was just huge swing and a miss in the second half. I got nobody to blame but myself. Whenever you set something on a pedestal that high, you're bound to be disappointed. That's what happened with this film. I was expecting so much. It was just something that can never be lived up to. And the way they went about it when they reveal him, he starts singing, the supernatural angle, just didn't work for me. It's not what I wanted in this film. I wanted a traditional serial killer. So this is one of the most disappointing movies of the year for me, but it also still had really cool elements. I really love the opening scene of this. Awesome performances by Nicolas Cage and Micah Monroe, aside from the singing. And I also just thought this movie was filmed really beautifully. I thought the cinematography of this movie was top notch. Not suspenseful or tense like a lot of other people think, but I also just think the whole thing looked really, really cool. I like the zooms. I like some of the stylistic choices they have. I like some of the narratives they're going for at the end. It wasn't all bad, but, compared to what I wanted, still let down a little bit. At number 33, huge surprise here, given that everybody hates this movie, that is The Crow. Now, I love Bill Skarsgård. He's one of my other favorite working actors in Hollywood, so I was bound to like this movie. I have a huge bias towards the guy. But it's been like 20 years since I've seen the original Crow. I have no frame of reference. I know people hold that to such a standard. I got nothing on it. I don't remember it. I saw it years ago. I forgot it. So I went into this movie kind of blind, and I had a pretty good time with this film. Again, it's very high on like the romance angle, if you find that believable. I understand some people's faults with the third act and how he's questioning this love that apparently transcends time. But I mean, it's The Crow. I didn't have a sky-high bar for logic required in this one. But I really like the stylistic choices in this one. I like the underworld when he goes in there. I like the way it kind of melts like a painting. Loved his face paint in this one and his costume. I thought it was significantly better than the original. I'm definitely in the minority on that one. This is just a movie I had a pretty good time with. I liked the world they built. I like Bill Skarsgård in anything he's in. Thought he was awesome in this role, personally. I know people kind of dumped on him before he even got the chance, but this is a movie that has probably one of the coolest third acts of the year, in my opinion. Absolute bloodbath. I loved the opera scene. Definitely not a perfect movie, but a movie I got more enjoyment out of than a lot of movies below it. Probably, again, because as I keep saying, expectations are everything in movies, and I went into this movie hearing the rhetoric. I just didn't think it was that bad. So at number 32 is a movie called Sting, a spider movie. This is just a very low budget creature feature movie where these couples are trapped in this apartment complex and this giant mutating spider keeps growing bigger and bigger. I believe it's on Hulu now, but I had a good enough time with this movie. It felt like a giant live action Goosebumps movie where it's like PG-13, but a little bit R, but not too hard that the whole family couldn't see it. And there's just some cool creative choices to this one. I hate spiders. I'm arachnophobic to some extent. So watching anything with spiders that's done creepy in any way is highly effective to me. Never really got there for me. Even people who hate spiders like myself, I think, can watch this and be pretty comfortable for the most part, aside from a couple of scenes. But there are a couple of unsettling jump scares in this, and the way they blend the shadows of spiders to look like plants and just creative choices I really liked. I just really liked this picture. It was very gloomy, very shadowy. I like the family dynamic in this movie of the young girl and the stepdad. It was just a fun little simple watch, and I appreciate those amongst the trees of these over 2-hour movies sometimes that just don't work. At number 31, another pretty divisive film in the eyes of a lot of people, that is M. Night Shyamalan's Trap. Much like the Guy Ritchie movie earlier, I'm glad I revisited this list because if I made this list way earlier in the year, probably would have been a lot higher. But I rewatched this one as well with people, and we were just laughing at how ironic and stupid and just ridiculous this film is, which I knew it was the first time, but this movie really does just require like absolutely no brain cells because this movie has some of the dumbest characters of the year as well. It's just done pretty fun. I mean, I feel like Josh Hartnett's not actually as good in this as I thought he was the first time. He's kind of a cartoon walking around, and I liked him a lot the first time I saw it. He's not bad by any means, but he's kind of just way over the top. I feel like even a serial killer would know immediately that guy's a serial killer. This guy is not even trying to deceive people. But yeah, you have this guy who goes to a concert with his daughter. They trap him in. The FBI is trying to catch him, and it's just an elaborate plot to catch a serial killer. Much like The Watchers, this movie just requires you to absolutely shut your brain off to have fun with it. And that's what I was doing in the movie theater. But upon the second watch, when I had somebody kind of nagging me in my ear, asking questions like why people are doing stuff, and it kind of took out my immersion of how stupid the movie is and how much fun I was having. It really did highlight just how ridiculous this movie is. So I can't get over my first watch. I had a good time with this film. Second watch, significant downgrade, but I still did have a decent enough time with it. Number 30 is The Tennis Love Triangle starring Zendaya. This was a tale of two movies. I liked everything to do with the tennis in this. I liked the way it was shot, how up-tempo it was, how zoomed, the music. Hated everything to do with the love triangle. These three characters were all equally unlikable. And it just went on for too long. I really liked this film for the first hour or so. If you've seen this movie, there's an entire third act where a character enters the challenger scene again, and they go through the entire tennis match basically a second time. And it just felt like that entire 20-30 minutes just did not need to be in the film. So for me, this movie starts off entertaining enough. That's why it's this high on the list. And I really did like the tennis stuff. I thought it was very stylistic. I thought this movie was shot incredibly well. But the fact that the characters are all just so miserable to be around, and this movie is just way too long, is why I just put it this low. At number 29 is Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. Now, I just binged the Caesar trilogy, and that's what helps and hurts this rating. Because really the problem I have with this movie is going into it, I liked the trilogy with Caesar a lot more than this movie. I liked all three of those movies significantly more than this. And I know it's not fair to rate like that because that trilogy is established. We know those characters as a start, conclusion, all that. But Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes was entertaining enough. You follow Noah and you follow his progression, and you get to see the legacy Caesar left behind. So I'm on board with where this is possibly going to go. But I just didn't think the villain in this was that interesting compared to the trailer. I really did like coming back to this world. That's just the problem with it. Again, like a lot of these things, mental block. I have a hard time getting over the fact Caesar's not in these, and he's the best part of this franchise. I think that trilogy, untouchable. But this was an entertaining enough movie. I did like setting the stepping stones from where this is to go. Who knows? If you finish a trilogy with Noah, maybe this goes way up and it just gets way better in hindsight. But where we stand now, just getting this movie and seeing where it's going to go, but no answers yet, I was left wanting a little bit more after how good Caesar's trilogy was. At number 28 is a sequel, Beetlejuice. Now, I am very late to the party when it comes to Beetlejuice. I love Tim Burton. Somehow I never saw that movie. No idea how. It would have been an all-timer for me. I loved it. So going into 2, I was anticipating it, and I have to say, I don't think it's as good as 1, but I think it's very fun and it's very entertaining. It's kind of the same old thing, but more of what you love, where everybody wanted to see Beetlejuice, so you got a lot more of him in the sequel, but the plot suffered because of it. It just felt like he was the focal point of the movie. You got to see Michael Keaton again. And the plot was just very loosely put together so they could market a sequel. That's my view on it. But I did have a good time with it compared to Furiosa. I thought it was a very, very fun sequel. It was just fun to watch Michael Keaton reprise that role again after all the years and do all these on-running gag jokes, musical bits. Very fun time. I'd imagine a lot of people are in the same camp as me. It's not objectively some fantastic movie or something, but a movie I had a good bit of fun with, so I'm okay with that. Number 27 is the Blumhouse remake of Speak No Evil. Now, honestly, I rewatched this a second time after the screening I had of it. When I saw it at the screening, I was kind of pissed, to be honest, because I liked the original Speak No Evil. James McAvoy's in this one. He's fantastic. But this movie just felt like an absolute kick in the balls, where they did everything the original did, but they did not want to put it home, where they were just afraid to offend people. They redid the ending so that it was more Americanized, whatever you want to call it. But after rewatching this with somebody for the first time, I thought it held up really well. I actually might like it more than the original, because after watching it a second time, it was actually kind of nice how brisk of a watch it was. When you watch the original, you will be emotionally drained. This movie plays more like a traditional thriller, and I kind of liked it for that, honestly, after I watched it a second time. The only problem I have with this film, honestly, is that I think the kid gives away way too much when you rewatch it. It's so obvious what this movie's about, even if you've never seen it, never seen a trailer. The way they had the kid in this version of it just kind of gives too much of the movie away. But aside from that, I thought this was a pretty entertaining thriller the second time around, where it's just, if you've never seen any of the source material, you just like an old school thriller you can throw on, trying to figure out what's going on. I think a lot of people are going to have a lot of fun with this. Honestly, would not be surprised at all if more people like this remake than the original, even though the original does serve its purpose. At number 26 is the latest Mel Gibson movie, Monster Summer. And this movie played like a giant Goosebumps episode for me. Basically, these kids are going missing in this town around Halloween on the pier. And this kid who's trying to become a journalist tasks Mel Gibson, an old cop, to help him figure it out. And they find out there's a witch in their town. I saw this one at an early screener. I had a really good time with it. It did remind me of a Goosebumps movie. It was a movie I felt like if I was a kid, I would have watched a good number of times growing up. Kind of reminded me of like Disturbia or something like Super 8. That's the type of feel it is if you've never heard of it. It's funny, Mel Gibson's kind of back in this movie. I don't know what happened to that guy. I thought he got like canceled or something. I don't know what he did. But regardless, it was good to see him in a movie again. I feel like I haven't seen that guy in a movie for 20 years. It's got the kid from The Black Phone, I believe, is the main character. I think he's pretty good for a kid actor. And this movie's exactly what the title is, Monster Summer, a fun little PG-13 Goosebumps type mystery. You have kids, I think everybody in the family can watch this movie, so very lighthearted. Nothing you're going to remember or just talk to everybody you know about. Have you seen this movie? But I think you could throw it on in the background during Halloween and it would play out just like a Creepshow episode just for PG-13. At number 25, one of the year's biggest surprises, that is Reb 1. Now, apparently, as I said, everybody hates this film. I don't know when that happened. All the critics just say this is garbage. It flopped at the box office. I had a blast with this film. I thought it was a well above average Christmas film. I'm not a fan of Christmas films, generally speaking. They're way too corny, way too sappy. This movie was just very creative. It was like a giant Marvel movie, but it was a Christmas movie, and I really respected that. A giant big action blockbuster with bits of Christmas thrown in. That's what I'm trying to do. Some really cool CGI choices with the snowmen, the battle blocks. I just had a lot of fun with this film. I think it's a pretty cool Christmas movie. We don't get a lot of movies with this scale of Christmas movies, any original ideas anymore. Always coming home for the holidays or it's a rom-com or something. So this one's going to be in my annual rotation if I ever do watch a Christmas movie. I think that's the thing, honestly, I will say. If somebody said to me, hey, you want to watch Reb 1? You want to watch a Christmas movie? I don't think I'd ever object. There's Christmas movies like Elf, Christmas Story. I've seen them like 50 times. I'm not really a fan. This is one of the ones I would definitely rewatch. If somebody said, hey, you want to watch this one? I'd have no problem. It's very watchable. And with that, we've officially concluded the okay category. And now we're getting into the very good category, the final 24. All of these movies, I would say in some way or another, are very, very good. Objectively speaking, they're well made. They're well acted. They're just good movies. And it's just a preferential thing where they land, but I think all of these movies would be enjoyed by most people. Coming in at number 24 is the most recent Robert Eggers film, that is Nosferatu. Now, just to be transparent, I'm not really a Robert Eggers fanboy. Didn't really like The Witch, not really a fan of The Lighthouse. I did like The Northman better than the other two. This is my favorite of his movies so far. I kind of think a lot of people like the idea of him more than his actual movies. Maybe I'm a skeptic. I feel like this guy's tone is just purposely slow every single time. Where he excels is taking you back in a period piece, making you feel like you're part of the world. Very immersive filmmaking. But what makes this movie so high on the list, this is probably the best looking movie I saw this year. The cinematography is absolutely phenomenal. You've seen this movie, you know what I'm talking about. I don't even want to know how this guy got the shots he did. Some of the world building in this, some of the castles, some of the scenery, just beautiful. It's like absolutely perfection when it comes to cinematography. And then you got Bill Skarsgård playing Count Orlok. He's basically unrecognizable. If you told me that was him and I didn't know, I'd never seen a poster, didn't see the title, wouldn't believe you because the way he looks, it's just, I don't know. I would have never guessed that's him. He is so immersed in this role. He's one of my favorite actors, as I already said. So to see him do what he did in that role, very, very special. I already said that most of his movies are slow. Much like the other ones, to me, this movie definitely borders on boring. My patience was tested. It is so purposely slow. And he's doing that Robert Eggers thing again, where he's got some scenes throw in. It's almost like they're gag jokes at this point to see what he can get away with. Count Orlok basically flashing you. It's ridiculous, some of the stuff this guy puts in his movies. But overall, I will say, I still had a good enough time with this. I thought the cast does fantastic. I thought it was a star-studded cast on top of that. And it just looks so good. It sounds so good. It's so well made. It's hard to overlook it. So, in my opinion, this is his best work by far so far. Next up at 23 is a foreign film called Red Rooms. Now, this is actually a French film. This was a Twitter darling for a couple of weeks. It was all over there. People saying it was such a good mystery. Kind of like a court drama. You have this girl who becomes obsessed with this case. This guy's on trial for killing all these people in these back rooms called the Red Rooms. He's doing it on the dark web. And that's what this movie's about. You're kind of seeing this from the perspective of an outsider who's following the trial. And how fanatical people can get. They don't really know anything about the trial. One of these characters is just like in love with this guy. She's for sure he's innocent. The other girl, who's the main character, is a bit more logical. She's a poker player, collects Bitcoin. He's very, very logical compared to her. So she's like questioning, like, this guy might have done it. And she's really looking into it. But where this movie excels, it's a pretty interesting mystery, in my opinion, trying to figure out, did this guy do it? Did he not do it? Figuring out everybody's motives in this movie. And I also really like the way this thing was framed. It's kind of interesting, they don't really show you what he does on these tapes in the rev rooms, but you're such a nosy person, you kind of want to know, like, what did this guy do? Like, how bad are these crimes? So you kind of find yourself becoming her, and you're becoming obsessed with this trial as you're watching it unfold. And I just thought it was a very, very well done, like, court drama mystery that kind of becomes a suspenseful thriller as it goes on. But, if you like foreign films, you like crime dramas, you like court cases, you like killer stuff, maybe check this one out. Rev Rooms, pretty good. Coming in at number 22 is actually a Tubi original horror movie called Lowlifes. Went and checked it out, no expectation. I mean, it's a Tubi original. Who watches Tubi originals and expects anything? But I watched this film and I thought it was very, very good, especially for a Tubi original. Couple of changes here and there. This movie might be in the top 10. I had a really good time with it. This is one of those films you don't really want to know anything to it when you go into it. But you have this family vacationing on the side of the road in an RV. These two hillbillies kind of pull up on him and ask him what's going on, ask him if they want to come back to their house. But what I really liked about this film is it's one of those movies that uses tropes against you. You think you know what this movie's going to do, you think you know how characters are going to act in certain situations, but it keeps flipping itself on its head and it keeps you guessing and it keeps it feeling fresh, and it just felt like that from start to finish. So this will not be a movie for everybody. This is a very kind of low budget B horror movie. A lot of very graphic violence, a lot of ridiculous stuff happening, some of the plot twists. And it's kind of sad, frankly, a lot of people will never check out and they'll probably never even hear of because it has that Tubi tag attached to it. But if you're into that sort of thing, check it out, it's free. At number 21, one of the most surprising action movies of the year, that is Boy Kills World. We're noticing a trend here. Anything with Bill Skarsgård gets a pretty high rating. But I really like this one. This one, you have this like mute guy in an action movie who has the inner monologue of Archer because he went deaf. And it just has some of the best, most balls to the wall, like what the fuck action I have seen all year. This movie I thought should have been rated NC-17, I said in my review. And it was like, I didn't even know if I liked this film for the first like 8 minutes of the 10-minute review. Because it's so weird. It's kind of like a live action comic book, but it's also like a serious action movie at points. But it really grew on me after I watched it because I really liked that weirdness they added to it. And I thought it aged it really well because the action stood out compared to all of those other John Wick clones we get now. As I just said, this movie probably could have been NC-17. Some of the violence in this is disturbing. There's a final fight scene in this with a guy with a box cutter fighting another guy hand to hand. I almost looked away numerous times. So I referred this to somebody. They watched it, they loved it, but they said, yeah, man, that was not an easy watch. This is an action movie through and through that's very stylistic, very comic book feely. But if you're into that type of thing, you're into that, just use Archer as an example. You want Archer mixed with an action movie? Give this one a try. You might like the style of it. I had a blast with it. Number 20 is the most recent movie, Alien Romulus by Fede Alvarez. Now, I binged the Alien series and did my own review series on YouTube because of this movie. I was looking forward to it so much. Love Fede Alvarez, the guy cannot miss, like the Don't Breathe, loved Evil Dead's remake. But watching this movie, I had pretty high expectations and I was not disappointed. I mean, this movie, in my opinion, I said hot take, best Alien movie to exist. Love Aliens, like the original Alien, but this movie does everything I want in an Alien movie. It's kind of funny to me. A lot of people took issue with all the throwback lines and all the references and Easter eggs. I didn't even notice them the first time because I was still making my way through that series, so they didn't bother me. But I watched this. I really love the face huggers in this. They're by far the scariest they've ever been. They're like giant spiders, and as I already said, I don't like spiders. Then you have choices of the xenomorph. It's back to being scary. There's very few of them. It's kind of hunting. It's not just in your face. It's not sci-fi. I like these movies to be scary, not sci-fi heavy, so that was right up my alley. And then it just does something from every movie. You have like the Alien throwback when they're fighting with the guns, and then you have the zero gravity scene, the big conclusion and twist at the end that again rubbed people the wrong way, didn't bother me. I had no investment in it. So to me, this movie took a lot of creative choices and it just did everything I want in an Alien film. I really, really enjoyed it. This was one of my favorite horror movies of the year. I thought it was very, very original in a franchise that quite frankly needs fresh life. Number 19 is a movie most people have probably never heard of, but I did find out it's free on Prime right now. That is Deer Camp 86. It's like Club Dread style humor. It's basically like Tucker and Dale versus Evil, stupid type of humor. You have this group of guys, they go up north deer hunting and they go to this possessed Indian burial ground. That's what the movie's about. They disturb the land, this like creature, this thing, or whatever's out there, this guy starts killing them off, and it is just a ridiculously stupid movie. So I recommend this one to everybody. If you like really, really stupid stoner comedies, late night movies like Club Dread, like Super Troopers, maybe check this one out. This movie was really, really funny. I was not expecting this movie to be so funny. But at the same time, I did see it at like midnight, so maybe I kind of had the giggles and I didn't know what was going on. But yeah, either way, I thought it was great. At number 18 is the Apple movie Fly Me to the Moon with Channing Tatum and Scarlett Johansson. And this movie's about faking the moon landing. It's kind of a rom-com, but I had a really good time with this movie. Hearing the backstory of what this was actually like, if this was a true story, which it says it is. But what I really liked about this film is it was really funny. I didn't expect that. But I also liked all the characters' motivations. I thought they were all equally likable in their own way. Scarlett Johansson, Channing Tatum, great chemistry. I had a good time learning about the story for sure, but I liked seeing this on 4th of July weekend because it really made me happy to be an American at a time where it feels like nobody really is. If you're an American, I feel like you should see this movie. At a time where it was simpler, it brought us all together for a common goal. We didn't fight, we just came together. I think it's a powerful movie. I thought it was very profound. Some of the things they say about faith and some of the things they say about our country. I really liked all of it, and I liked the rom-com angle. So this was kind of an unexpected gem in my opinion. I would gladly rewatch this. If somebody nagged me to watch a rom-com, this would be one of the ones I would throw on, believe me. At number 17 by Zelda Williams is Lisa Frankenstein. Now, as I said earlier, I'm a sucker for Tim Burton movies. I love Edward Scissorhands, so this movie was right up my alley. I love the gothic aesthetic of this. I love the opening scene when they have the black and white with the music. It was just immediately immersive to me. I thought the comedy was not the funniest of all these type of movies, but it was funny enough. I chuckled a good bit. What you have going on in this one, you have Lisa Frankenstein resurrecting this corpse from the dead, and she basically befriends it. They call it a coming of age story, but let's be honest, it's this generation's Edward Scissorhands. That's all I'm going to say about this one. If you like Tim Burton movies, you like Edward Scissorhands, check Lisa Frankenstein out. But if you're into coming of age stories mixed with macabre elements, this one will be right there with you, just like all those other ones, so check it out. Next movie at number 16 is Late Night with the Devil. Now, this movie felt so weird. It felt like a fever dream seeing this in theaters because it doesn't feel like a movie. It feels like you're watching a 70s or an 80s late night show, but in the form of a movie, which is awesome because it's found footage and it's very creative. As I said, somebody kind of burnt out on religious movies. Not the case with this movie. This movie was very, very fresh. It felt very original. I'm happy because in a genre that's oversaturated, to find new ways to do this, you have David Dastmalchian, I believe, the guy who plays the host, and he is just fantastic in this. He has a ton of charisma. And you have a bunch of cool little things on here who makes this show go by. You have a skeptic on here, you have a psychic, and then you have this girl who apparently is possessed. So you're watching this show play out like a Halloween special where he's having different guests, and it's bouncing back and forth between the live footage and the backstage footage. And it's just very, very stylistic. It feels like a 70s or an 80s show. It's awesome. So if you're into that type of thing, you want to just watch a movie that feels very weird compared to a lot of movies this year, check this one out. I've never seen another movie like it, and I watch every horror movie. So you want to watch a found footage movie a little bit more creative, Late Night with the Devil would be the one I want to say to you. At number 15 is the weird combination of Your Monster. Your Monster stars Melissa Barrera, and it's kind of like a coming-of-age horror comedy rom-com musical. You want to call it that? She falls in love with this monster in her closet. It's kind of similar to Beauty and the Beast. But this girl's down on her luck. She just survived cancer, I believe, and just nothing's going for her. Her ex dumped her. And she falls in love with this monster who lives in her closet. If that's silly, if that's stupid, and I have no idea how this movie works, but I absolutely loved it. Didn't work for everybody whose reviews I watched, but for me, the comedy really landed. Actually liked the musical bits a good bit too, and I'm not really a musical guy, but this is a movie that has no business being as good as it is. I mean, you're watching these two hang out, the monster and her, and there's a point in this movie where you start thinking to yourself how utterly ridiculous this movie is, but you're actually enjoying it. At least that's my experience I had. So if you like strange rom-coms again, you want to watch something very out there, but you want to take a chance on a weird rom-com, give Your Monster a look. This one's better than most. At number 14, the big summer blockbuster itself, that is Twisters. Now, starring Daisy Edgar-Jones and Glenn Powell, I think these two have great chemistry in this movie. And I really like the approach they have to it of having him be a YouTuber going around tracking storms like that. But she's kind of doing this for the betterment of the world as a scientist. Very cool contrast, because that's kind of how the world's working nowadays. Like I said in my other review, Dr. Mike, the dude's basically just a YouTuber at this point. He's not even a real doctor. The guy just does podcasts and shit. I don't even know what that guy's doing. Very relatable to how they make Glenn Powell in this movie. And again, don't burn me at the stake. I didn't like the original Twister that much, so I thought this movie was just bigger and better and funnier, and just everything about this was better than the first Twister. Definitely in the minority, not lost on me. But comparing the two, coming from the other one the same week of, I didn't expect to like this movie after watching the original, but I had a really good time with this. Seeing it in IMAX, I thought the CGI was phenomenal, so was the sound design. It was kind of like intense and scary to some extent watching these storms. I felt like it did a good job of establishing scale of the damage of these. They show you the after effects and why it's so important to prevent the tornadoes instead of repair them. I think that was all very profound and very effective, so I had a really good time with this film. Dumb, big, fun summer blockbuster, but we don't get too many of those anymore, and this was one of the better ones I've seen. At number 13 is another action movie called Monkey Man. And when I saw the trailer of this movie years ago, I thought it looked really, really stupid. I saw Jordan Peele's names attached to it, and I saw a guy in a suit wearing a monkey mask. Was not sold. So obviously this is an action movie and I liked it, but what I like about this film after rewatching it is the heart it has. This movie feels a lot different than all of the other movies I talked about, like Boy Kills World, Killer's Game, John Wick, all those types of films. This movie feels like a very story-driven movie with some really cool action in it, and it's not just an action movie that needs a passable story. It's written like backwards, and I like that. Because you're following Dev Patel as this down in the dumps guy in the slums of India, which looks absolutely beautiful, by the way. Still can't believe they filmed this on an iPhone during COVID. But yeah, you're following his character, and he's just like the most likable guy ever. This guy does all the right actions in every single scene. He's doing whatever he can to get by. And that's really what sold me on this. You get to see his past with his mom. You get to learn about his religion. His character's just awesome. He's one of my favorite characters of the year. Even during the fight scenes, when he's at the risk of death, he's like saving people from taking collateral damage. He refuses to run somebody over to survive. He'd rather get caught. This guy is just like pure good. And you're watching this guy and you cannot help but root for this guy. So I had a great time with Monkey Man. Very stylistic, awesome soundtrack. It's like Rick Ross mixed with Bollywood music. I don't know. There was something about this movie that really hit. I had a fantastic time watching this movie. So if you haven't seen Monkey Man and you want to see an action movie that's a little bit different on it, it's more story driven and it's just very unique, watch Monkey Man. I feel like it's different than any of the other action movies I talked about and will talk about. Coming in at number 12, and one of the strangest horror movies I saw this year, is The Substance. You can all but guarantee this movie's going to be in most people's top 10, and it's almost in mine. It barely missed the cut. I rearranged my top 15 like 10 times. What you got going on in this one, you have Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley. Basically, they take this drug called The Substance, and they get a second chance at youth. There's like a second part of them with a shared conscience. When this movie was announced, I was just not in the mood to watch it because I was like, I'm not in the mood to watch a body horror movie again. It's not really my brand of horror unless it's done great. So I thought it was just going to be this grotesque body horror movie. I was really surprised how much substance was in The Substance. I mean, the style of this movie is off the charts. Super chaotic, super fresh picture, vibrant colors, soundtrack is awesome. There's more ass shots in this movie than you're going to find on the hub. It's crazy. This movie is nothing like I expected, in a good way, but you're watching these two versions of the same person, one very young getting to relive their youth and seeing the benefits and negatives of that, then the older, and it's kind of doing commentary on that, why looks aren't everything and the downfalls of looking beautiful. So I'm just going to say immediately, it's a fantastic movie. If I've caught your interest already, go check out The Substance. It's great. Reason it didn't make my top 10 is the third act of this movie is batshit insane. In a good way for a lot of reasons, but it just went too cartoony for me. Like, you'll know what I mean if you've seen this film. Final act of this movie, it's trying to make a point clearly, but it goes a little bit too far to the point I was like, okay, this needed to end 10 minutes ago. This is still going. This is just absurd. So that's why it's not in the top 10. Doesn't mean I didn't love this movie. This movie was fantastic, and I will gladly rewatch this movie when it comes. Coming in at number 11, the most controversial horror movie of the year is Terrifier 3. Now, this is starting to get to like cult status. Everywhere I look, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, everybody's talking about Terrifier. To the point I'm starting to question, like, how many people watch these movies? I thought this was kind of niche. This was my thing. People are taking my thing. Apparently everybody watches these movies. I mean, like your grandma probably watches it. But this is obviously the Christmas version of Art the Clown, where you're watching him on Christmas attack Sienna again. And let me just say this. I like 2 more right off the bat. 2 is my favorite. I don't think I'll ever like a Terrifier more than 2. This movie, again, probably should have been NC-17. I mean, I came in expecting more of 2. This movie's probably the most disgusting movie I've ever seen on the big screen. And I know a lot of people love that. It was treading a fine line in this one where I thought they were kind of doing this just for the gore hounds. Like, they felt the need to up themselves. I loved this movie. I had a really good time with it, but there was like 3 or 4 scenes where I was like, we're still killing the guy? Like, it's been like 3 minutes, man. But what I really liked about this movie, I love the way it was filmed. I love Christmas horror movies. I like how it was a throwback kind of grindhousey vibe of the original. And I like some of the fun they're having. Art's back at it again, doing ridiculous antics with eating Christmas cookies after slaying people. Some of the jokes they're having, the subtle mannerisms of him meeting Santa, but you have absolutely iconic kill scenes in this, some of which I've never even seen mentioned, a guy getting a box cutter down the face. So just be warned, this is a very hard watch. If you are not a horror fiend, you keep seeing the rhetoric, you see people gassing up Terrifier, and you go, maybe I'll take the leap. Don't do it. You will probably be scarred. If these movies are not your thing, they are getting extreme. But I did love this movie. I thought this movie was so stylistic. I thought it really built on the lore of Sienna and Jonathan. It kind of reminds me of Saw. I'm in the minority now. I'm watching these movies for the plot. Even if the plot's bare bones, people don't like the plot, I'm waiting to see what these movies turn into. The gore is just an afterthought at this point. I love Sienna's character, one of, if not my favorite final girls ever. So I cannot wait to see how they conclude these movies. I cannot wait to see what they do and how they take this to the next level. Hopefully they go a little bit more fun like the second route, but regardless, I still think this is going to be like a Christmas horror classic, much like Black Christmas in a decade. We've made it to the top 10 again. I've already done a list of these movies, so I will briefly go through these, but these were my 10 that stood out. As I already said, like the entire top 20 was interchangeable to me. I like them all a lot. Coming in at number 10 finally was The Beekeeper, starring Jason Statham. This is Jason Statham at his best if you like action movies. He's a beekeeper while also being a beekeeper. He's like part of this hitman organization while also being a legitimate beekeeper. Movie's having way too much fun with bee puns where they're making puns about the fact he is a beekeeper and the organization being called the Hive. Kind of unhealthy, but I found it funny. And he just really likes this old lady who ends up getting phishing scammed and then she takes her life because she lost everything. Then he just gets absolute revenge on this terrorist organization. And this is not high-level art. This is a low-hanging fruit action movie. Every once in a while, I need to cleanse my palate with more Jason Statham. So this is probably his best movie in my opinion. So if you like those type of action movies, you like Jason Statham, give it a look. It's free on Amazon Prime, and I've watched it a couple of times now with friends and family and people who wanted to watch it. Everybody I watched it with had a really good time with it. At number 9, one of the most clever thrillers of the year, that is Strange Darling. Now this movie's a strange movie. It's kind of a mystery thriller about a serial killer hunting a girl. You have this guy named the Demon hunting the girl when the movie starts off, but it's told from the style of chapters. It starts off with chapter 3, then it goes like chapter 1, chapter 5, chapter 2. So it's disorganized, dissynced, and you're watching a story play out unnaturally, but that's what makes this mystery so fascinating. I thought this was one of the most clever movies of the year. I thought it was very stylistic. It was beautiful to look at. Sound design great. This glaring foghorn whenever the demon's on screen. And it's just a movie that keeps you guessing. It's a cat and mouse thriller. You're trying to figure out where it's going to go. Keeps taking twists and turns. It's hard to predict where it goes. Satisfying conclusion. Only reason this movie's not in my top 5 is it kind of drags towards the end, in my opinion. Didn't bother some people. But as for mysteries, if you like cat and mouse thrillers, if you like movies that have a little bit of a desync structure you have to figure out, check this movie out. Not a lot of people talking about it, but Strange Darling was fantastic. At number 8, a sequel to a movie I really enjoyed is Smile 2. You have Naomi Scott playing pop superstar icon Sky Riley in this one, and if there's any fairness in the universe, she should be up for an Oscar. And what I loved about this movie is it's scaled up and it really gives you an insight to the mind of a person who's famous and has a lot of pressures from society on them. You're watching her world crumble around her and the scares are bigger and better, and I just thought this was super immersive. And I love the music. I'm a sucker for pop music. I thought this was like a live action concert horror movie. So it all really, really worked. Ultimately fairly predictable. Some of the best jump scares of the year. But I still really like what this movie did, and I'm really anticipating what number 3 is going to do. So this is a franchise that keeps getting better and better. Director's the master of jump scares. Really good movie. Coming in at number 6, a movie that will not be for everybody, that is Heretic. So Heretic is the latest religious horror movie, and it's basically just a giant theological debate in the form of a movie starring Hugh Grant. Playing this creepy old guy, these 2 Mormon girls go to his house, try to convert him, and he locks them in his house and he puts them through a gauntlet testing their faith. Now I like to call this movie a thinker's movie. Everybody I've talked to, every time I've explained it, this is a movie for people who love to sit and ponder life. They like to talk about existence, existentialism. Why are we here? How are we here? What do you believe? Why do you believe it? How concrete are your beliefs? Because that's all this movie is. It's a giant theological debate where people are talking about life and death and what's the purpose of life and religion, the start of religion, how much similarities they all share. It's very, very captivating. For a movie with almost no action, the first half of this movie legitimately is just conversation. I thought it was beyond compelling. I was absolutely hooked. Best dialogue of the year, in my opinion. But this movie's going to totally depend on what type of person you are. If you like these types of films, you like going on Reddit and you like debating religion or commenting on people's Facebook statuses telling them they don't know what they're talking about, this one could be for you. But in all seriousness, this is a very, very well-made movie, one of the most memorable movies of the year, and quite frankly, a movie I have not stopped thinking about from the beginning to the end of the movie, where it starts and where it ends, what that's trying to say, and just some of the conversations. This is a movie, if you're up for it and you really want to dig into the back of your mind and think about some stuff, this movie might stick with you for a long, long time, and the things you believe and just the way you think about things. So check it out if you like thinking movies like this. I think you will not be disappointed. It's a fantastic horror movie. Coming in at number 5 and my most anticipated movie of the year, and I was not disappointed, the conclusion of the X trilogy, Maxine. So Maxine starring Mia Goth, this entire trilogy is absolutely fantastic in my opinion. Perfect trilogy in my opinion. Loved X, loved Pearl, loved Maxine. Loved the style choices of this movie. This movie was not for everybody. Some people thought this was a whiff. Not the case with me. I love this film. I thought it had the best soundtrack of the year. This movie's style is just oozing. I love the 80s aesthetic. I love the world they built around the Night Stalker. I love the giallo angle they're going for. If Ty West wants to make 15 of these movies, he can keep making them. It's number 5. Could have been a little bit higher, but the top 5 is absolutely stacked in my opinion. Coming in at number 4, one of the biggest surprises of the year for me is Honora. Now, Honora stars Mikey Madison as Honora, the stripper prostitute who marries a rich Russian kid. They go to Vegas, elope, screw, do drugs, party, having a grand old time. But eventually this kid's family gets wind of the fact that he has married a stripper. They are not okay with this because they're like a big mafia crime family from Russia. And they want the marriage annulled because they don't want their son marrying a stripper for pride purposes. So they send a bunch of henchmen to the door, the kid runs off, and you're left with the funniest movie of the year when you have Mikey Madison as Nora going around with these henchmen looking for this guy, and it is chaotic, it is relentless, but it is absolutely hilarious. That's why it's this high on the list. This is easily the funniest movie I saw this year. First half of the movie, they're just screwing, they're partying, they're having a grand old time. Second half of the movie, when she's with the henchmen, funniest movie of the year, it is nonstop. There is a segment in this film, 20 minutes consistently I laughed. I did not stop laughing for 20 minutes, my stomach hurt. Unhealthy, I know, is what it is. It's kind of exhausting at certain points because it never stops. It's basically uncut gems times 100. People are yelling over one another. It's meant to be purposely chaotic. That's the type of story it is. Advertised as a stripper's version of Cinderella, I feel like that's fairly accurate. But it's not as much of a trope as you think it was going to be. The end is actually pretty profound. I like the 180 character arc of her. I like the conclusion of it all. And I think the movie ends up having a really cool message, a really cool purpose. You like spending time with these characters. They're all interesting in their own way. This is a movie, I can't tell you the exact specifics of every point in it, but if I see any of these characters, I see any scenes from this down the road, I will 100% know what it's from, because this movie is a very, very memorable movie in my opinion. Coming in at number 3, the absolute weirdest movie of the year, that is Cuckoo. Now, I always compare movies to Barbarian, movies that you don't want to know anything going into. Cuckoo is this year's Barbarian. Very, very weird. I like weird movies. I like movies that keep me off guard. I like movies I don't know what they're about half the time. And this is one of those films. You don't want to know anything about this film. You never want to watch its trailer. Basically, it's about this girl who goes to Germany and she goes to this resort to stay. And after dark, she cannot go out. There's weird occurrences happening to the people. People are acting funny all the time. And she can't figure out what's going on. It stars Hunter Schafer, Dan Stevens, and it's just an absolute blast. As I said, I was like obsessed with this movie. I was like addicted after I watched it. I wanted to watch it again immediately. Some of the best scares of the year, there's very few of them. I think there's like 2 or 3 scares, but they're very, very good when they work. So I was really into this film. If you like very weird movies, you want movies that you're going to tell people like, have you ever seen Cuckoo? Watch Cuckoo, because I'm not going to tell you what it's about. I'm not going to tell you where it goes. And I cannot wait to keep rewatching this movie and showing this to people who have no idea what it's about, because it's just that fucking weird. Coming in at number 2, in my opinion, the scariest movie of the year. And you know my affinity for scary movies. That is Oddity. Now, Oddity is a movie that kind of has a reputation at this point as being a scary movie this year. A lot of people have said that. That's what I said in my review. Stand by it. But what it's about, you have this girl whose sister was murdered. She runs an oddity shop. She uses the possession of the dead. She's trying to figure out her sister's murder. And it's just an old school, low budget mystery with supernatural elements. It's really, really effective if you like scary movies. This movie is pretty much terrifying. And I don't say that lightly. I know we're all adults. I don't really get scared either, but this movie is easily the scariest movie of the year, in my opinion. This movie is so suspenseful, so tense, absolute masterclass in jump scares. This movie probably has like 4 or 5 of the best jump scares I've ever seen in the same movie. I'm getting chills just thinking about it. Like thinking about these jump scares, like it's crazy how effective this is. I'm a very hard audience in that regard, but I jumped out of my seat like 4 or 5 times where I was like, what the fuck? So if you want an old school scary movie this year, if you follow my channel or you just like scary movies, you want one that's traditionally scary, not elevated horror, nothing about metaphors. You want your palms to sweat, heart rate increased. You want to jump out of your seat. This is not for the faint of heart. This movie is really, really good. But coming in at number 1 in a movie that quite frankly, everybody would know is number 1 if you follow my channel, been gloating about it the entire year, and I'm going to keep talking about it for years to come. That is Abigail. The movie about the ballerina vampire where you have a group of mercenaries who's tasked with kidnapping this young girl. And what I really love about this movie is it's buy ready or not, and it really just feels like an old school vampire movie that I love. They said they took inspiration from The Lost Boys and Fright Night and all those like fun comedic like action comedy vampire movies. And you can feel that in here. It feels like one of those movies that would have came out in the 80s or 90s. It's a fun vampire movie. This movie really worked for me. I thought the acting was really, really good. It has a star-studded cast. Again, Dan Stevens, I love the dude. Melissa Barrera, it's got Alyssa Weir, I believe her name is, playing Abigail. She's absolutely fantastic. Hilarious story, in my opinion. She couldn't even go to opening night because she's too young to get into her own movie. But this is just a movie I'm definitely going to continue to watch for years and years when it comes out. One of my favorite vampire movies ever. Special for so many reasons. One of my favorite movies of the year, as I said. I've watched it 2 times at home since with friends and family and people who wanted to see it. Everybody I've shown this to absolutely loves it, and they cannot believe it. They hear ballerina vampire, and they just cannot believe they would have as much fun as they do, but watching her dance up and down the halls, pull her silly antics, how cute she is while being an absolutely demented vampire. Abigail is my number one, and it was never close from the start of the year when I saw it. And with that, we have officially reached the end of my ranking of all the movies in 2024. Now, I know it's probably a bit different from a lot of people's list. I don't see every movie that comes out like they do, and I also have different tastes. But if you're feeling ballsy, comment down below. Give me your favorites, your least favorites. Give me your top 10, your bottom 10. I'm really curious where other people stand this year. I think this was a very, very good year for movies. Check out my other lists up here at some point if you want to see those, my best and my worst of the year, a more simplified, but also a bigger breakdown of some of the movies I said in the start of the finish of this. Like the video, subscribe down below, join the channel, love talking movies with you. But other than that, I will see you in the next video. Peace.